I accidentally called Matteo De Luca hot, and he crossed the room to my desk like I'd just signed my own death warrant. I thought I'd be fired. Instead, the mob boss offered me a fake, dangerous, temporary deal. I took it knowing it was a lie, because I needed to survive. It seemed simple, until he started shielding me, teasing me, and looking at me like I already belonged to him. When the charade surfaces, the scandal will be the least of my problems, because Matteo no longer seemed willing to pretend he could let me go. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. Hot Mic, Frozen Life. By the third time the alarm screamed, I understood that the universe had clocked in early just to ruin me. I shoved the blanket off the bed, planted both bare feet on the Arctic floorboards of the Lincoln Park apartment, and arrived at a conclusion only true panic can deliver. I had exactly 22 minutes to get myself, alive, to the 47th floor of De Luca Holdings. "You did the sleep shouting thing again," Marisol called from the kitchen, raising a mug like she'd won it in a tournament. Some telenovela heartthrob's name. For the record, Chloe. This household maintains certain standards, and you personally demolish each one. Marisol Castelli, 27, barista at the brew line directly across from the company, my roommate since college, only answered to her full name when her mother was on the line. To me, and to everyone who mattered, she was Mari. I did not shout. I shot back, already bolting for the bathroom. And it wasn't a heartthrob. It was a layered dream. The Italian. Again. Mari, if I miss this train, I am filing a formal complaint with an agency I will personally found. The shower clocked in at 2 minutes. My coffee rode in a plastic cup that dribbled warm down to my elbow. The granola bar had been pulverized at the bottom of my bag, but at my salary, pulverized still qualifies as breakfast. I left twisting my wet hair into a knot with a pencil I'd retrieved off the living room floor, a detail that summarizes my entire financial situation more honestly than any bank statement. The CTA was crammed in that very specific Chicago Monday way, every passenger hauling what looked like their own coffin toward the office. I wedged myself between a man drowning in discount cologne and a woman narrating her divorce into her phone at full volume. I tried to think about spreadsheets, about quarterly figures, about anything that wasn't the Italian from the layered dream. De Luca Holdings claimed the most self-important towers in the loop. Pale marble, smoked glass walls, security guards who studied your badge as though weighing whether you were worth eliminating before their lunch break. I crossed the lobby, finishing the last of the granola bar, greeted the doorman through a full mouth, and beamed at the elevator like it might turn me in. "Morning, Bennett," said Greta from accounting, catching my reflection in the elevator mirror. "Aware your blouse is inside out." I glanced down. The tag waved cheerfully at my chin. "Aware," I lied, stuffing the seam under my blazer. "It's a deliberate aesthetic. You're a strange person." "Thank you." I'd agree. The executive floor received me with its standard sub-zero hush. No laughter, no one breathing above a whisper, no one made direct eye contact, and there was a never-confirmed rumor that staring into the smoked glass of the CEO's office could cost you your job, your serenity, and possibly a finger. I dropped into my chair, opened 3 spreadsheet tabs, fit the headset over my ear, and tried to persuade my brain that Monday was merely a theory. "Are you on the internal line?" Mari slid into the call, her voice hushed, because the brew line sat right across the street, and she could surveil the entire company through the counter window. "I am. Has he shown up?" "Mari, I swear on my tragic paycheck. Start this again and I'm blocking you. Did you fix the blouse? Saw you crossing the street. How could you possibly see that from there? I'm gifted." The meeting was set for 11. European investors, 3 Italians, 2 Swiss, 1 Austrian whose accent was so dense the translator apologized roughly every 3rd sentence. I had no business being in that room. My actual job that morning was revising the financial appendices the director had dumped on my desk at 9:30 The word urgent stamped in furious red, but they'd summoned me anyway, to perch on a folding chair in the corner and update spreadsheets live as the questions flew. I brought the laptop, the headset, and the distinct sensation of being something large was about to eat. Matteo De Luca came through the door at 11 exactly. I had never watched a man mute an entire room simply by entering it. No greeting, no smile, the jacket black, the shirt white, the silver signet ring on his little finger catching the light once and tossing it back like a threat. The European investors, who I was fairly sure had each ended a human life with olive paste at some point, dipped their heads by a single millimeter. 1 millimeter. I caught it. He took the head of the table, opened the folder, and began in Italian-accented English, his hands perfectly still. He spoke of margins, of ports, of luxury hospitality, of Tuscan wines, with the patience of a man who knows the exact price of every comma. I could not stop tracing the line of his jaw. I am a professional. I pay my bills. There is a 5-year plan in a notebook at home. I am a professional. Chloe, Mari murmured through the headset. Reel the drool back in. I am not drooling, I mouthed. I can sense it from across the street. Marie, hush. Describe him. For research purposes. I looked at Matteo. He was outlining, with surgical composure, why one of the Swiss operations would be restructured. The Austrian nodded along like a man receiving doctrine. Matteo tilted his head a fraction, and the light traveled down his temple, over the dark hair, to the corner of a mouth that, in my entire experience of him, had never once smiled, and I, fully convinced my headset mic was dead, opened mine. God, that man is criminally attractive. The words left my lips, dove into the headset, sprinted down a cable I would have sworn was dormant, leapt across the internal call system, surfaced in the speakers of the panoramic conference room, and told through every soul present like a bell at a funeral. The silence that followed had a texture. The investors quit breathing. The CFO inhaled his own saliva and disguised it as a cough. The intern in the far corner watched me the way you watch a slow-motion collision. The Austrian asked the translator, in German, whether he'd heard right. The translator, drained of all color, confirmed that he had, and Matteo De Luca, not a single muscle of his face moving, raised his eyes from the page to me. Until that instant, I hadn't known there was a particular variety of death that arrives while you're upright, pulse intact, heart still drumming, but the soul gone clean out of the body. I felt mine evacuate through the crown of my head. I half expected to see a tiny ghost of myself waving goodbye from the ceiling. Chloe, Mari moaned. Chloe, please, tell me that channel was off. Mari, I mouthed. I'm dying. Matteo shut the folder, unhurried. Every motion of his carried the weight of something rehearsed a decade in advance. He slid the chair back, rose, and crossed the entire panoramic room, a full city block of it, in total silence. The black shoes made no sound on the pale carpet. The investors tracked him with their eyes alone, like people watching a wave build through a window. He halted beside my folding desk. I kept my gaze fixed on the laptop as if the spreadsheet might agree to adopt me. The Miss Bennet. I lifted my face, because the alternative was cowardice, and cowardice on that floor ran pricier than my rent. His eyes were dark, not black, dark in some specific way. With something beneath it I lacked the words to label. He wasn't angry. Worse than angry. He was curious. Say it again, Matteo said, pitched low enough that only the first 15 feet of the room could catch it, and those 15 feet happened to include the investors, the CFO, and the unraveling translator. Looking at me this time, I opened my mouth, shut it, opened it once more. I'd rather be fired in silence, I said, assembling the steadiest voice I could out of whatever pride still fit inside my chest. A pause. And then, for the first time in the entire history of his existence within that building, Matteo De Luca laughed. Not a roar. A low sound, nearly just an exhale, brief as a blade slipping through an apple, but a laugh all the same, in front of me, because of me. The investors exchanged glances like witnesses to an eclipse. We resume, Matteo announced, already turning back toward the table. In 5 minutes. Miss Bennet, stay. The room stirred like people abruptly reminded they had bodies. In my ear, Mari breathed, Babe, babe, you're folklore now. I couldn't answer, because Matteo was still standing beside me, and his scent, which I will not detail, because I am a professional, was something warm and expensive, and for 2 solid seconds I forgot my own name. He drew the chair out from the head of the table, and, before returning to it, dropped his voice another millimeter, meant only for me. Next time you'd like to discuss me over the mic, request permission first. Then he walked back to the head of the table as though nothing had occurred. I made it through the rest of the meeting with my breath jammed behind my teeth. The investors pretended, with the exquisite tact only the very wealthy possess, that no such sentence had ever been uttered. The CFO dodged my eyes with the focus of a man avoiding contagion, and Matteo, from the far end of the long table, didn't glance my way again. Not once. That was worse. I could feel the deliberate absence of his gaze pressing against the back of my neck. When it finally ended, I scooped up the laptop, swept down the marble corridor in what felt like a single stride, slipped into the elevator, and dropped 47 floors with the sensation of traversing an entire country. Out on the street, the Chicago wind met my face like a slap from somebody's mother. Marie was waiting at the brew line, brandishing a coffee overhead. Pour something strong in that, I pleaded. It's 2 p.m. Pour 2 things. Sit. Talk. Every detail. I need to know whether he looked at you the way I picture him looking when... Marie. No. That night, back home, she restaged the whole catastrophe as a one-woman production performed atop the couch, casting a throw pillow as Matteo. I groaned beneath a second pillow while she nailed his cadence. She truly nailed it, and I despised how hard I laughed. Say it again. Looking at me, she whispered, dragging her voice down 2 octaves, cradling the pillow like a leather folder. Chloe, this is dialogue from an adult film. I'm changing my name and fleeing the country. You're going to marry him. Marie, I swear to God. Marry him, have a baby, christen it something extremely Italian. My phone buzzed against the counter. I raised the pillow just far enough to peek. An email from HR. I opened it the way one disarms a bomb. Dear Ms. Bennett, this is to inform you that the termination request filed under your name earlier today has been canceled personally by Mr. Matteo De Luca, CEO. No administrative measures will be pursued in connection with the 11 a.m. meeting. You remain in your role as financial assistant on the executive floor. Good evening. I stared at the screen. I looked at Mari. I looked back at the screen. What? She asked, pillow still in her lap. Boss, he canceled my firing. What firing? The firing nobody even told me about. Mari blinked. Hold on. Someone tried to get you fired. The CFO, probably, mid-panic, and Matteo killed it. Himself. The hush in our cramped apartment was a different species from the hush on the 47th floor, but it carried the same weight. Slowly, Mari set the pillow down. Babe, she said, serious for the first time all evening. A man like that doesn't reverse a firing for nothing. I know, I whispered. You understand what that means. I know. It didn't mean it was finished. It meant it had just begun. And there, the email still glowing on the screen and Mari's joke fading into the quiet, I understood for the first time that I had wandered, no map, no warning, onto a floor far more treacherous than any spreadsheet could ever account for. Chapter 2. Coffees No One Asked For. I walked into De Luca Holdings the next morning with the resolve of a Roman soldier who knows the day will kill him, but intends to die impeccably dressed. I'd spent the night drilling neutral expressions in the bathroom mirror. The verdict: my face cannot do neutral. My face does, I'm thinking about something inappropriate. I'm thinking about something very inappropriate. And I'm thinking precisely what you suspect I'm thinking. I sat down at my desk, powered on the computer, breathed. Perched on top of the keyboard was a white paper cup with a black brewline lid. I picked it up slowly, the way you lift evidence before a jury. Double shot, oat milk, a dusting of cinnamon. Exactly how I order it. No card, no note, no name. Greta, I called to the accounting coworker passing by under a tower of folders. Did you see who left this? No. Was it a delivery guy or someone from inside? Bennett, yesterday you announced on the internal mic that the CEO is hot. I'm not asking a single question for 6 weeks. For my own protection. She kept walking. I drank the coffee. It was flawless. That, more than anything, terrified me. The week became a series of small, precise maneuvers. Wednesday, the brewline cup waited on my desk before 9. Thursday, it waited earlier. Friday, I arrived at 8:30 and it was already there, still steaming, as though someone had clocked my exact train. I tried to interrogate the brewline runner down in the lobby. A wiry kid in a green beanie who regarded me like a boy staring down his own demise. Orders are orders, miss. Whose orders? Orders are orders, miss. How much is this costing per day? I'll cover it. Just give me a name. Orders are orders, miss. I retreated to the elevator in defeat. On the way up, I caught my reflection and discovered I was smiling. That was the moment I understood I'd already surrendered something important, and I wasn't getting it back anytime soon. Matteo appeared in the break room twice that day. The first time, I was filling a water bottle when he came in for an espresso from the elaborate machine no one in the administrative peasantry dared touch. He didn't look at me. He took the espresso. He left, but the air pressure in the room shifted the way it does before a storm, and the bottle spilled over my hand because I'd forgotten I owned a hand. The second time, he was in the hallway, not waiting for me, not technically. He was examining the plant in the enormous corner vase, as if it had committed securities fraud, and I simply happened to pass. Miss Bennet, Mr. DeLuca, breakfast. Yes? The brew line. What about it? Is it adequate? I looked at him. He looked at the plant. Adequate, I echoed. Yes. Are you asking whether the coffee that materializes on my desk every morning is adequate? I am. And if I said no, at last he turned his eyes to me. The hallway light fell along the line of his jaw, and I, exacting professional that I am, filed the image away for use in future emergencies. I'll change the order, Mateo said. He walked off down the corridor without waiting for an answer. Mari nearly dropped her phone when I reported it that night. He asked if the coffee was adequate. Yes. Adequate, Chloe. Yes. That man is going to kill you with longing and despair simultaneously. Mari. I'm only narrating. Friday. I went to lunch with 3 co-workers at a low-key Italian place 2 blocks from the office. House wine, a salad that cost roughly my grandmother's rent, tepid talk about year-end bonuses. The operations director from the hospitality division, a man named Beckett who talked far too much and smelled like duty-free cologne, sat beside me and discovered a precise spot on my arm, just below the elbow, where he could plant his hand to underline a sentence. He planted it there for the first sentence. He planted it there for the second. I withdrew my arm with all the grace that student debt instills, and on the third he planted it there again. Then Mateo walked past the restaurant door. It wasn't on his calendar. It made no sense. But the door swung open, and in he came, Lorenzo Ricci trailing behind. Lorenzo, the man in the black suit with the face of a sealed vault, Mateo's shadow since the beginning of recorded time. The two of them cut across the dining room toward a reserved table in the back. Mateo passed our table, stopped, studied Beckett's hand, still resting on my elbow. Beckett, Mateo said, quiet, nearly cordial. Miss Bennet works for me. Beckett yanked his hand off my arm at the speed of a man pulling it out of an open flame. Mr. DeLuca, enjoy your lunch. Mateo moved on to the back table without a backward glance. Lorenzo, passing, clocked my face for half a second. Not friendly, not hostile. A note taken. Beckett didn't finish his meal. He conjured an urgent phone call and bolted, settling the bill for all 4 of us on the company card, which is more or less the contemporary definition of fleeing. The following Monday, HR announced that Beckett had requested a transfer to the logistics division in Houston for personal reasons. Houston, Mari repeated in the kitchen, brandishing a sauce spoon. He shipped a man to Houston. Mari, he didn't ship him. He shipped him. Chloe, he only... Houston. Chloe. Houston. By Friday night I'd hit my limit. 5 brewline coffees in, 3 accidental run-ins with Mateo in 3 parts of the building he had no conceivable reason to be in, and a whisper from Greta in accounting that 2 captains from the import division had been quietly removed. The company was simmering. I was simmering. I decided I was going to his office, and I was going to ask. I crossed the executive floor clutching an empty folder. My alibi was a report no one had requested. I knocked on the smoked glass door with the knuckle of my middle finger. "Come in," his voice said. I pushed the door open. Mateo's office was an extension of the man. Pale marble, glass walls framing the entire city, a turntable on a side shelf with vinyl stacked in meticulous alignment. It smelled of costly leather, and something woody I couldn't name. Mateo stood behind the desk, no jacket, white sleeves rolled to the elbow, and that's when I saw what the suit had been hiding. A fresh split on his left eyebrow, a small bandage he'd clearly tried to disguise, and along his forearm, beneath the shirt, a bruise running purple all the way to the wrist. I froze in the doorway. "Miss Bennet, I brought a report. On the quarter. The quarter that ended in March. That one. Consolidated in April. Yes. And this report is required tonight. Friday at 7:30. Yes, I said, and shut the door behind me, because cowardice, as previously established, was expensive. Mateo looked at me, said nothing for one long second. He crossed to the desk, set his fingertips on the edge, and the low office light slid down the bandage on his brow, as if specifically designed to offend me. "Ask," he said. "Ask what?" "The question, the one you came to ask." I swallowed against a dry throat. "The coffees? What about them?" "They're yours." "They are. Why?" He leaned forward slightly over the desk, the shirt pulled taut at the shoulder, and I watched the bruise climb up toward the bicep. He didn't pretend it wasn't there, because I wanted to. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Beckett requested a transfer. You know it wasn't for personal reasons. I know. He angled his head a millimeter. And so do you. I took 2 steps in. He stayed behind the desk, but I saw that he'd stopped breathing. So had I. The empty folder shook in my hand, so I set it on the desk to hide the tremor. Mr. DeLuca. Matteo. Mr. DeLuca, I repeated, because at that hour, Matteo was a trap. What do you want? He looked at me in a way no man ever had. No hurry in it. No promise. Only the cool confirmation of something that had been settled at some earlier point, on which I'd never been consulted. For you to stop pretending this is uncomfortable, he said. And when we both know it isn't, it is uncomfortable. Lie better. I lie terribly. I know. He came out from behind the desk. He didn't touch me. He stopped 3 steps away. Exactly 3, as though he'd measured them with an engineer's ruler, and for a stretch of time my memory refuses to total. Neither of us breathed correctly. I could see the bruise on his forearm shift when he closed his hand. I could see the cut on his brow, too fresh for a man who'd spent the day in conference rooms. I could see the fatigue under his eyes, a fatigue with nothing to do with quarterly figures. Who did that to your eyebrow? Work. What kind of work leaves a mark there? Mine. You're a CEO. I am. CEOs don't get hit. He held my gaze a second longer, and something in his face changed. Didn't soften, exactly, but yielded a millimeter. Like a man deciding to leave a door ajar without committing to opening it. Go home, Chloe. Mr. DeLuca, go home. Are you okay? The question escaped before I could catch it. He blinked. Once. And in that blink, I realized no one on that floor had likely asked him that in years. Go home, he repeated, lower. The driver will take you. I take the train. Not tonight. I left the office with the empty folder still trembling, crossed the marble hallway, dropped 47 floors, and climbed into a black car that was idling in the garage without my having requested it. The driver didn't speak. Neither did I. In the back seat, the city sliding past the tinted glass, I kept replaying the bandage on his brow, the purple bruise running down his forearm, the "go home" delivered so quietly. I gripped the strap of my bag until my fingers ached. The driver's silence was the kind that comes with instructions not to ask, and that, for some reason, was the part that frightened me most. In Lincoln Park, Mari had the door open before I could dig the key out of my bag. And tell me everything, she ordered. Mari, everything, I told her, standing in the kitchen, still in my coat, the bandage, the bruise on his arm, the 3 steps, the go home, the black car on the street. For the first time all week, Mari went silent. Babe, she said after a beat, you know what that means, right? I don't. You do. Marie, that man is hurt. And he's sending you home in an armored car. It wasn't armored. It was armored. Chloe. Black. Armored. Tinted windows. A driver who doesn't talk. Fully armored. I dropped onto the kitchen bench, stared at the ceiling, thought about the bandage on his brow, the 3 steps, the way he'd breathed when I asked if he was okay. My phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. Mari wants to drag you to the gallery tomorrow. Go. I'll be there. And Mari read it over my shoulder. He has your number. He's my boss. He has your personal number. He's my boss. Mari, how did he know I wanted to drag you to the gallery tomorrow? I looked at her. She looked at me. Mari, I swear I didn't tell anyone. Mari, I only told Greta, in accounting this morning, at the brew line. And I closed my eyes. Greta tells everything, I whispered. Greta tells everything, Mari confirmed, in a sliver of a voice. I looked at the screen again. A single M at the end. No period. No signature. Nothing but that letter, which, standing there in the Lincoln Park kitchen, under the jaundiced light of the cheap bulb, seemed like the most elegant warning in the world. Are you going? Mari asked softly. I looked at the message. I thought about the brow, the forearm, the 3 steps. I'm going. Chapter 3. The Wrong Door. Saturday afternoon, autumn light flooding through the windows of my Lincoln Park apartment, and Mari was already planted in front of the living room mirror, adjusting a green dress that looked like it had been stitched by the devil himself for the express purpose of dismantling some stranger's serenity. Up, she said, not looking at me. We're going to the gallery. I was cocooned in a gray blanket on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to pinpoint the exact moment in my adult life when Mondays had become the most hazardous event of the week. 5 days after my near firing, the saga of Director Beckett still fresh in the collective memory of the whole floor, my brain kept circling back to the precise pitch of Matteo De Luca's voice when he'd said, "Say it again," looking at me. "I'm not going," I said, dragging the blanket up to my chin. "I'm staying right here. I'll turn into mold. Scientists will study me." Mari crossed the room, seized the blanket by one corner, and ripped. The cold hit all at once, along with the smell of reheated coffee from the cramped kitchen and whatever floral perfume she'd misted onto her wrist. "You're coming because I pulled 2 shifts at the brew line to buy you a respectable beer afterward," she said. "And because it's a new gallery in River North. Free champagne. Art nobody comprehends. Men in white shirts. Up." Resisting Mari was a fool's errand. 20 minutes later I was in her passenger seat, hair half dry, lipstick applied at an angle, wearing a short black dress she'd pressed into my hands without entertaining a single objection. The gallery sat on a quiet side street behind Hubbard. Gray brick facade, a tinted glass door with no sign, only the number 1147 etched into the metal. Mari parked and turned to me with the smile that usually precedes regret. "You know what I love about this place," she said. "Nobody here asks what you do for a living." We went in. The main hall was a long corridor of white walls, pale marble underfoot, discreet security posted in the corners like installations. Waiters drifted by with silver trays. People conversed at a volume too low to be relaxing. I grabbed a glass of champagne purely to have something to hold. Mary evaporated around the first corner, towed off by some acquaintance, and I found myself in front of an enormous canvas of black paint layered over black paint, trying to determine whether it was art or just expensive carelessness. A man in a suit passed and said, "Fascinating, isn't it?" And I said, "Oh, yes," because that was easier than confessing I understood none of it. That's when I noticed it. Above the side door, discreetly carved into the frame, a crowned lion clutching an olive branch, the same crest as De Luca Holdings, small, silver, easy to overlook. I didn't overlook it. The champagne soured in my mouth. "Mari," I called under my breath, craning around. She'd vanished between 2 silver-haired men by the next wall. It was fine. It was fine. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe the De Luca family owned 10 galleries, and not one of them involved the man I was failing, rather spectacularly, to stop thinking about. I needed the bathroom, not because I needed the bathroom, because I needed a door that would shut behind me. I followed a discreet sign at the end of the side hallway, turned left, and opened the first door that looked plausible. It wasn't the bathroom. It was a back office, small, dark wood paneling, a desk lamp glowing on the oak desk, the shut-in smell of old leather and oil paint, and standing between the desk and 2 men I'd never seen before was Matteo, white shirt, no jacket, sleeves rolled to the elbow. One man had him by the collar, the other stood too close to his face, saying something in Italian in a low, dry register. I didn't catch the sentence, but I caught what kind of sentence it was. Matteo saw me first. His eyes found mine for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction I took in everything. The blood at the corner of his mouth, the fresh mark along his jaw, the red beginning to bloom on the left hem of the white shirt. The 2 men turned a quarter second later. The silence that followed had a texture. "Get out," Matteo said to me. His voice didn't rise. That was the worst part. It was his meeting voice. "Now." My feet refused to move. The man gripping his collar slowly let go. Matteo straightened his shirt with one short motion, eyes never leaving me, and when he spoke again, it was in Italian. 3 clipped sentences aimed at the 2 men. I didn't follow the words. I followed the effect. Both of them left through the back door without looking back. When it was only the 2 of us, Matteo finally breathed, a brief, controlled breath, like a man reassembling his own body from the inside. "You got lost," he said. Not a question. "I was looking for the bathroom," I said, my voice coming out thinner than I'd wanted. "I swear I was looking for the bathroom." He crossed the small space, stopped a meter away, and for an instant, I thought he might touch me. He didn't. He took the champagne glass from my hand, with an almost courteous care, set it on the desk, and said, "You didn't see anything. Matteo, you didn't see anything," he repeated, quieter. "Say it back to me." "I didn't see anything," I said, and understood in that instant that it was the most useless lie 2 people could possibly share. I had seen all of it. He had seen that I'd seen. The sentence existed only to give a shape to the lie we'd be carrying from here on. He nodded once. "Come with me." We left through a different hallway, Not the one I'd come in by. Mari never knew. Matteo had someone tell her, in code, that I'd felt unwell and gone home. I learned that later. In the rear lot, a black armored Mercedes waited with the engine running. He opened the back door for me and got in the other side. The driver didn't greet us, didn't glance back. We pulled out down an alley that didn't lead toward Hubbard. The city slid past the tinted glass like a film with the sound off. Matteo sat 3 hand widths from me, spine straight, left hand fisted on his knee, the blood on the shirt hem a shade darker now. No one spoke for 7 blocks. The AC hummed low, and the leather of the seat carried something expensive and sterile I couldn't name. I couldn't stand it anymore. "Are you okay?" I asked. He turned his face slowly, looked at me, didn't answer. And that was precisely when I understood everything I needed to. That silence wasn't a refusal. It was the entire answer. The man who could mute whole rooms by entering them had no way to answer that question without shedding the rest of the disguise. I faced forward again, folded my hands in my lap. I sensed that one more look at him and I'd cry. And I didn't have clearance to cry inside that car. "Who are those men?" I asked, eyes ahead. "People who work for me," he said. A pause. "Worked. You're bleeding. I know. You need to— Chloe." The first time he said my name. Not Miss Bennett. Not a you. Chloe. It left his mouth with that accent. With care, as though he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times before releasing it. I went quiet. "I'm going to drop you home," he said. "You'll go inside. You'll lock the door. You'll tell Mari you felt sick. Tomorrow you'll go to work like any other day. You didn't speak to me today. You weren't in that office. Is that clear?" "It is. Look at me." I looked. His eyes held something I'd never seen in them. Not exhaustion, not anger, fear. Controlled, organized, professional fear, but fear all the same. And the fear wasn't about the blood on his own shirt. "Is that clear?" he repeated. "It's clear," I said. The Mercedes stopped on my street. He waited for me to climb out without moving from his seat. Before I shut the door, I leaned back in and said, softly, "You never answered whether you're okay." He looked at me for a full second. "I'm not," he said, "but you are. That's what matters." The door closed. The car pulled away. I couldn't sleep. Mary came home at 11:30, mildly drunk, telling an overlong story about a man who'd tried to buy a painting with cryptocurrency. I laughed in the right places. She bought the whole thing. She went to her room, shut the door, and 2 minutes later I heard her heavy breathing through the wall. I stayed in the living room, low light, knees drawn to my chest. I stared at the wall for a span of time I couldn't measure. Outside, the street offered up the occasional sound of a cab, of a heel too distant to be a threat. When the buzzer rang, it was nearly 3 in the morning. I knew who it was before I stood. I opened the door. Matteo was on the landing. No jacket. The white shirt traded for a dark gray one. No bloodstain now. A bruise was beginning along his jaw. His eyes dropped to me and stayed. "I came to see," he said, low, as if the sentence were sufficient explanation. "Whether you were okay. We just saw each other." "I know." I opened the door wider. He stepped in. He surveyed the small living room once, absorbing it all in a single sweep. The pillow fallen on the floor, the low lamplight, Mari's shut bedroom door, the cold cup of tea abandoned on the side table. He stood. He didn't sit. I stood too, because offering the couch to a man like that, at that hour, felt wrong. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "I thought if I saw it with my own eyes, I'd be able to—" "Sit," I said. He didn't sit. He braced his hips against the back of the couch, hands in his pockets, shoulders lower than I'd ever seen them. The first layer came off right there, standing in my tiny living room, Mari snoring through the wall. "Are those men going to come looking for you?" I asked. "No," he said. "Those men aren't going to come looking for anyone again." I swallowed against a dry throat. I was supposed to be afraid. I wasn't. I felt sorry for him, a character flaw on my part. I recognized it in the moment, and still it was what I felt. "You don't sleep much," I said. "I sleep enough." "Lie." He almost smiled. Almost. A movement at the corner of his mouth that lasted half a second and undid itself so fast I doubted I'd witnessed it. "Lie," he conceded. We stayed quiet. Not absolute silence. The silence of Marie snoring, of the old fridge humming, of the city breathing outside. He hated absolute silence. I didn't know that yet, but I'd find out soon enough. That early morning, this kind of quiet did the job. "I need to go," he said, after a while. "You need to sleep, okay? Chloe." "Yeah, thank you." "I didn't ask for what," He didn't explain. He went out the door with the same care he'd come in with, and I stood there staring at the wall he'd leaned against for 10 minutes, half convinced it would somehow leave a mark. Monday morning, I walked into DeLuca Holdings with my hair done, my suit pressed, and my head running on 3 frequencies at once. I sat at my desk, powered on the computer, breathed. I hadn't even opened the first spreadsheet when the perfume reached me. Sweet, expensive, painfully refined, with an undercurrent of jasmine that seemed engineered to leave a trace in the air. I lifted my face slowly. Vanessa DeLuca was standing beside my desk. I'd never seen her this close. Matteo's cousin, director of strategic relations at the holdings, the only woman on the executive floor whose name everyone pronounced with care when she passed. Up close, she was taller than she looked from across the room. Dark hair pinned low, pearl earrings, the smile of a person who knew precisely how her smile operated. "Chloe, darling," she said, in a voice sweet enough to ache in your teeth. "Swing by my office in a minute, would you? I just need to ask you a silly little thing." And for the first time since I'd set foot on that floor, through an open mic, a canceled firing, and 3 of the strangest small hours of my life, I felt a chill crawl up the back of my neck. Chapter 4. What Happens in Warehouses. Vanessa's office carried the same heavy jasmine she wore on her wrist, blinds cracked halfway, a white desk without a single sheet of paper on it, 1 gold pen squared along the edge, as though every object in the room were waiting for permission before it dared to exist. "Sit, darling, this won't take long." I sat. She asked me silly things, exactly as promised. A closing spreadsheet, an expense report I'd never laid eyes on. The method I used to cross-reference port entries. She smiled through each question. She held my gaze through each answer. She committed nothing to paper. On the 9th question, she tilted her head. "Bennett, are you truly a Chicago girl?" "I am." "Big family?" "Small." "How lovely, having a local on the floor," she said, smiling. "We tend to trust our own a little more, don't we?" 11 minutes. I walked out with the unmistakable sense of having been weighed, measured, and slotted into a file, and that not one of her questions had any relation to whatever she actually wanted to know. The surname hung in the air like a question she hadn't bothered to finish. I didn't tell Matteo. I decided it was nothing. I decided it was paranoia. I decided life was finally going to settle down a little. That was the precise moment life decided otherwise. Wednesday night, Oliveto, a small Italian place in the Loop, an understated facade, warm yellow light. Matteo had closed the restaurant. Not a power play, just practicality, he explained, seated at the lone table set in the middle of the room. He preferred we talk without the noise. I pretended that was a normal thing for a person to arrange. The tablecloth was white, pressed, the folds creased sharp. The glasses were tall and weightless. A record turned low in a corner, and I knew the voice from the gravel of the timbre alone. Chet Baker. "You like it?" he said, not asking. "I recognize it. Different. I collect," he said, easing his back against the chair. "Old records. Jazz, mostly. There's a room in my house that's nothing but shelves. And nothing digital. Nothing digital. I don't like how clean digital sound is. It needs to crackle a little." I laughed. He looked at me and stalled a half smile. "What?" he asked. "Nothing. You're less mysterious when you talk about music." "Good," he said, rolling the stem of his glass between his fingers. "I hate absolute silence. I need noise around me. A record, a conversation, anything. I sing in the kitchen," I said, before I could stop myself. To fill the silence, terribly, he angled his head a fraction of a degree. That was his version of, "Go on." "I mean it," I continued. "I sing off key in a way that's borderline offensive." "What song?" "Don't ask me that." "What song?" "Matteo. Chloe." I sighed, looked up at the low yellow stucco ceiling. I confessed the title of an early 2000s pop song I shouldn't even admit to knowing the words to. Matteo shut his eyes for 2 whole seconds. When he opened them, he was smiling for real for the first time all night. Small, restrained, but his. "I still want to hear it," he said. "You're insane." I had my suspicions. The food came. I don't remember what I ordered. I remember he made me laugh 3 times between the appetizer and the main course, and that somewhere between the second and the third, I caught myself leaning forward, propped on my elbows, and he was mirroring me from the other side, and the white tablecloth between us had shrunk in a way that defied physics. It was the best night I'd had in 3 years, which was exactly why it didn't last. We left through the back of Oliveto, since Matteo's car sat in the alley behind it. I led, He stayed 2 steps back, one light hand at my waist carrying no weight, only steering. The night was cold, thick with the damp smell of freshly washed asphalt. A single street lamp burned at the far end of the alley. The whole thing took 3 seconds. A silver van halted in the middle of the alley. The side door slid open. 2 hooded men dropped out. I never even heard Mateo's voice. I only felt his arm trying to shove me backward. In the same instant, a stranger's hand clamped my elbow and wrenched me toward the vehicle. I screamed. I think I screamed. The second man's hand sealed a cloth over my mouth that tasted of dry fabric and dust. The last thing I saw before the van door slammed was Mateo on the asphalt, down on one knee, drawing something from inside his jacket. The van tore off. I didn't black out. They didn't strike me. It was fast, professional, cold. One of them set me on the back bench and zip-tied my wrists. The other drove in silence. The ride was short. 12 minutes, maybe. From the jolts and the reek of oil, I knew we'd left the loop and gotten close to the port. When the van stopped, they hauled me out again. A large warehouse, stained cement floor, a yellow bulb swaying from the ceiling, the smell of standing water and scrap metal. They sat me on a metal chair in the corner farthest from the entrance. They didn't tie me to it. They didn't have to. My wrists were already bound. My legs were shaking in a way my head had no control over. A man came toward me. He stripped off his hood. I'd never seen the face, but I recognized the accent. Sicilian, rougher than Mateo's. "Nothing personal, signorina," he said. "It's a message." "Carmine," another man warned from across the warehouse. "Moretti didn't send you here to chat." Carmine Moretti. I memorized the full name without meaning to. A surname I'd already caught in some hallway exchange at the company. One of the family's nobody on the executive floor said aloud. "You stay put," he told me. 30 minutes. No longer. Then your boss comes to collect you. I wanted to say something clever. I always want to say something clever. But the only thing that left my mouth was, "He's going to kill you." Carmine looked at me, not with anger, with something worse. The calm of a man who knew I was right. And that being right was part of the message. "I know, signorina," he said. "That's the whole point. Those 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I counted floor tiles. I counted roof beams. I tried to recall the lyrics to the embarrassing song I'd told Mateo about at dinner. I couldn't. Everything in my head was white with red at the edges. At the 23-minute mark, the metal door of the warehouse opened without ceremony. I watched from the corner. I couldn't stand. Mateo entered first. Lorenzo Ricci, his right hand and head of family security, 3 steps behind. 2 more men came with them, but I registered no faces. I registered Mateo's walk. No rush, no running, jacket buttoned, shoulders lower than I'd ever seen them. And the eyes were something I'd never seen on a human face before. Carmine turned to him and started to open his mouth. "Don De Luca, it's only a message. There's no..." Mateo said 3 sentences in Italian. Short, measured. I didn't follow the words. I followed the temperature. Lorenzo moved first. Carmine moved after. I shut my eyes before I could see all of it. I didn't shut them in time to miss the hearing. A short thud. A scream that began and never finished. The specific sound of metal meeting bone. A sound I'd never heard before and would carry for the rest of my life. Silence. Another thud. Silence again. My breath had stalled somewhere between my ribs and wouldn't come back. Hands cold. Fingertips prickling. A fine tremor climbing from my knees to my chin. I tasted metal in my mouth and was certain, for a second, that I'd be sick right there, in the metal chair, my wrists still raw from the zip tie. When I opened my eyes, 2 bodies lay on the floor and the other 2 men were kneeling, backs to a beam, hands on their heads. Mateo was in front of me, on one knee, hand reaching for my wrist. He cut the zip tie with a small pocket knife, slowly, as if afraid of hurting me. "You're in one piece," he said, not a question. Him convincing himself. "I am. Look at me." I looked. "You're in one piece," he repeated. "I am. Mateo, I am." He nodded once. He helped me up. Lorenzo materialized at my side, set a light hand on my back to steady me, and guided me toward the door. Mateo followed. I looked back once. The 2 kneeling men were still kneeling. Lorenzo would remain behind with them. I understood without needing it spelled out. In the car, I sat in the middle of the back seat. Mateo got in the other side. The driver pulled away without saying where we were headed. I didn't ask. That's when I felt it. His hand rose to the back of my neck, carefully, as if I were made of wet paper. The long fingers spread against my skin, cold on the outside, warm beneath. They were trembling. Not much. Enough. I didn't turn my face. I didn't say a word about it. I laid my hand over his and held it there. The tremor slowly eased, but I kept my hand in place, because I knew that if I let go too soon, he'd hate me for having seen. "We're not going to your place," he said, low. "Not tonight." "Okay, I'm taking you to mine." "Okay." His penthouse was in Streeterville, in a building with a private garage and an elevator that opened straight into the apartment, floor-to-ceiling glass. Chicago on the far side of it, blinking yellow and white. The vinyl stopped on the turntable in the corner. A smell of cedar and old paper. He shed his jacket, draped it over the arm of a chair, crossed to the balcony, slid the door open. The wind came in, cold, lifting the hem of my skirt. I followed. The city below was a carpet of yellow light. He set his forearms on the cold metal railing. I leaned beside him, shoulder just grazing his. We stayed like that for a stretch of time no one measured. "My whole life I believed loving someone is a fatal weakness," he said, not looking at me. His voice was rough in a new way, that anyone who comes close to me becomes a target, that the fewer people I let near, the more of them survive. I didn't answer. I waited. "Tonight, in that alley, when they dragged you into that van," he went on, "I understood I've lived the whole thing wrong, because keeping you at a distance didn't protect you. It didn't work. Matteo, I can't promise you a safe world. I never will be able to. Not with the name I carry. I know." He turned his face to me. I turned mine. "I didn't ask for safe," I said. "I never asked for safe. I asked for the truth. I know. The problem was never that you're dangerous, Matteo. It's that you've convinced yourself you don't deserve to be loved. That's something else. That's an entirely different thing." He looked at me for a long while. He didn't touch me. He didn't lean in. He only looked, with the same gravity he'd brought to cutting the zip tie in the warehouse, like a man deciding on something that was going to cost him. "Come," he said, finally, "and I'll show you where you're sleeping. Alone. Tonight. Alone." "Why?" "Because tonight can't be the night I take you to bed for the first time," he said, and his voice held a moved firmness I'd never heard in him. "Tonight you almost died. I don't want the first time to smell like a warehouse." I had no answer. I nodded. He led me down the hallway to a guest room with a wide bed and a window facing east. He handed me one of his t-shirts to sleep in. He didn't touch me. Before he closed the door, he paused at the threshold. "Chloe." "Yeah, I'll be on the other side of the house. If you need me." "Okay." The door shut with a soft click. I lay flat on my back, pulled his t-shirt on over the dress, and stared at the white ceiling. The shirt smelled of his skin, of cedar and something cleaner underneath. I closed my eyes and was asleep before I noticed I was falling asleep. I woke to morning light on my face. I rose slowly, barefoot, and eased the door open. The penthouse was quiet, that brand of silence he hated. I crossed the hallway. That's when I heard voices in the living room. I slowed. I reached the mouth of the hallway without making a sound. Vanessa DeLuca stood in the middle of the living room, hair loose this time, gray dress, leather folder tucked under her arm. She'd come in without knocking, with the ease of someone who still kept a key to the private elevator from some old family arrangement. I read it off Matteo's posture, his back to me, near the turntable, shoulders drawn tight. "Cousin," she said, in that same sweet voice. "I hope I'm not interrupting." She caught sight of me over his shoulder. She smiled. The smile was aimed at me, wide, flawless, as if we were old friends. "Chloe, darling," she said. "Good morning." Matteo turned his face slowly. He said nothing. For 2 seconds too long, he simply held still, his gaze moving first to me, then to the folder under Vanessa's arm. And his silence told me, before either of them said a word, that the folder had a name written on it. Chapter 5. The Man in the Suit. The Streeterville penthouse woke up differently that Thursday morning. I knew, because it was the first time I'd ever woken inside it. And even so, from the careful hush of the hallway, I sensed the house had learned to breathe deep the night before. Matteo had given me the room at the far end of the hall, a bed too large, sheets that smelled of something expensive and foreign, an entire window facing Lake Michigan, still dark at its edges, the cold glass meeting dawn, while a thin seam of light opened on the far side. I slept no more than 3 hours, not because of the bed, because of his hand, the one that had trembled against the back of my neck in the car days earlier, and that kept trembling inside my head every time I closed my eyes. I remembered the weight of his fingers, the warmth that came after, the way he'd tried to bury the tremor by resting his temple against mine. I got up barefoot. I padded down the hallway over the deep carpet toward the living room, and that's where the morning began to tip sideways. Vanessa DeLuca sat on the white couch, legs crossed, a leather folder propped against her thigh, smiling at me like I were the hostess who'd kept her waiting too long. Her perfume had already annexed the entire room, something floral, heavy, the kind that arrives before its owner does. "Good morning, darling," she said. Sweet voice, glacial eyes. "I do hope I haven't interrupted." Matteo appeared in the kitchen doorway a beat later, white short-sleeved shirt rolled at the forearms, coffee in one hand, face unreadable. He stood there, motionless, saying nothing, for 2 seconds that felt like an entire trial. "Vanessa," he said, low, "you don't have hours for walking into this house." "I have a key, cousin," she replied, not lifting her eyes from me. "Family arrangement. You remember? The key expires today," Matteo said, tone unchanged. "Hand it back before you leave." Vanessa smiled as if she hadn't heard. I swallowed the indignity of standing there in socks, no bra under the t-shirt of his they'd lent me, planted in the middle of a conversation that plainly didn't include me. Vanessa extended her hand toward me like she was greeting a client. "You must be Chloe. I've heard so much." "What a pity," I said, leaving the hand where it was. "I haven't heard a thing about you." She laughed. A small, trained laugh, the kind rehearsed in a mirror. I'd love to change that." Matteo crossed the room, stopped beside the empty armchair, and offered a single sentence. "The folder." Vanessa lifted the leather folder, looked at me once more, and set it on the coffee table with exaggerated care, as though laying down an offering. "Lisbon reports. Dear, nothing that ought to frighten the lady." She rose with the composure of someone whose next move had already been agreed on with somebody else. She kissed the air near Matteo's cheek. She left through the private elevator, unhurried. When the doors closed, I finally breathed. "Does she always do that?" I asked. "No," Matteo said, eyes still on the elevator. "Today was because of you." I didn't know what to do with that sentence, so I did what I do best. "Coffee?" I asked, heading for the kitchen like I owned the floor under my feet. He followed without answering. He leaned in the doorway. He watched me open 3 wrong cabinets before I found the sugar. The kitchen was too white, too cold, with an Italian coffee machine that resembled an expensive torture device. When I finally settled onto the tall counter stool with the mug in my hands, he said, "There's a meeting at the company this afternoon. I want you there. As an assistant, as yourself." The distinction landed. I nodded slowly. "Okay." He turned to go, stopped halfway through the motion, and looked at me sidelong. "Chloe." "Yeah, thank you for staying last night." I couldn't get a word out before he was gone from the kitchen. The 4th floor meeting room was smaller than the one on the 47th Saris, but that was where the real decisions were made. Dark walls, a heavy wooden table, blinds half lowered. Matteo at the head. Lorenzo Ricci on the right. Black suit, hands folded, eyes on me before I'd even sat down. 2 captains I'd never laid eyes on. And Vanessa, at the corner opposite Matteo, smiling at everyone like the morning had never occurred. Matteo went straight in. "As of this week, 3 operations stop routing through the holdings. The contracts move to independent structures. Whoever currently answers for Detroit answers directly to me. No intermediary. The port flows leave central accounting." The captains exchanged glances. Vanessa didn't blink. "That's a reorganization," she said, sweet. "Or is it a goodbye?" "It's a cleaning." "A cleaning of what, cousin?" Matteo regarded her with the patience of a man who'd settled everything before he sat down. "Of people who confuse loyalty with ownership." I stared at the tabletop just to keep from laughing. Lorenzo caught it, and it was the first time in 3 months I saw the corner of his mouth shift a millimeter. The meeting ran 20 minutes. When the captains filed out, Vanessa lingered. She gathered her bag slowly, circled the table slowly, paused near Lorenzo, and said, in a tone meant for me to catch, "Lorenzo, dear, you really ought to run the background on our new guest before she learns too much. Bennett is such a common surname in Chicago, isn't it?" Lorenzo didn't answer. He only raised his eyes to her with a calm, worse than any reply. Vanessa smiled, pleased to have planted the line, and left, trailing the perfume behind her once again. Matteo shut the door after her. He set both hands on the back of a chair. "She doesn't touch you," he said, not looking at me. "Ever." "Did you just say that to her?" "I just said it to myself." Lorenzo stood in silence. Before leaving, he stopped beside my chair. "Ye Miss Bennett, Mr. Ricci." He held my gaze a second longer than necessary. I didn't know what it meant, but I filed away, in my head, that I needed to find out. Matteo left me in his office to wait while he dealt with something with a captain on the floor below. 5 minutes, he said. Don't open a drawer. I waited 10, and I opened a drawer. It wasn't curiosity. It was the bottom drawer, already ajar, a brown envelope sliding over the edge as if determined to fall on its own. When I bent to push it back, 3 sheets slipped free. Receipts, children's hospitals, pediatric surgeries, large sums, everyone paid by a shell company whose name I didn't recognize, but with Matteo De Luca's signature at the bottom of each. 3 hospitals, 11 surgeries, no donor named in any public record. I knew that because I knew the holding's philanthropy reports by heart. I sat down on the office floor with the papers in my lap and cried out quietly, no sobs, just a thin thing that ran to my chin before I noticed it. The carpet smelled of cedar and of something I only felt near him. When he came back, I'd already returned everything to the envelope and the envelope to the desk, but I hadn't properly dried my face. He stopped in the doorway, looked at me, looked at the desk, looked at me again. You opened a drawer, he said. I sat on the floor, I answered. Why? I shrugged. Because the first time I really saw you, you were bleeding onto a white shirt in a gallery. I wanted to know who the man nobody saw was. He didn't answer. He crossed the room, lowered himself to the floor beside me, leaned his head against the wall. I felt his knee meet mine, light, a warm weight that stayed. It isn't charity, he said after a while. It's interest. Interest on what? On everything I've ever done. I rested my forehead on his shoulder. He didn't move. We stayed there until someone knocked on the door, and even 1 second past it. I met Mari at the brew line at 6. She ordered 2 bucket-sized coffees and steered me to the back table before I'd even shrugged off my coat. The place smelled of burnt beans and the thin rain that had started outside. Tell me everything, and start with her face. Vanessa's. 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 Yes, hers, I told her. The couch, the folder. The Bennett is a common surname line. The meeting, Lorenzo, the hospital receipts, everything, except the part where I sat on the floor and cried, because that part was still mine. Mari listened without interrupting, which is the rarest event in her entire world. When I finished, she downed half her coffee in one pull and said, Babe, tell me, you're not in love with a monster. You're in love with a man who taught himself to pass for one, and he's starting to drop the costume. I choked. That's bumper sticker philosophy. That's the truth, Chloe. Look at me. You never cried over any boss. You cried over the guy in the receipts. I looked at her. And what do I do with that? Mari gave the smile she only gives when she knows exactly what she'd do in my shoes. Stay. He turned up at my apartment at 11 at night. He didn't call first. He buzzed twice, with the patience of a man who'd already resolved to wait however long it took. Mari, in her room, was pretending to sleep before I'd even reached the door. Matteo came in wearing a dark jacket, no tie, hair a little disordered from the Chicago wind. He brought the cold of the street in with him, and a smell of rain that hung in the hallway. He took in the place like he was seeing my kitchen for the first time. And he was. The sink with the dinner dishes, the crooked magnet on the fridge, the dish towel with coffee stains I'd been promising to wash for 3 weeks, the yellow bulb that lent the whole thing the look of an old film. It's small, I said, defensive. It's yours. He moved to the counter, set his palm on the granite behind me, not touching me, and stayed there a second longer than necessary. 3 steps had become half a step. I caught the smell of his coat, his neck, the whole night that hadn't yet begun. The granite was cold beneath my hand, and his heat, behind my shoulder, brought the air to a halt. I bought a house, he said. I looked up. A house. In Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, an hour and a half from here. Why? He took a moment. He looked at the cabinet above my head as if the answer were stored up there. Because I spent my whole life living in places that weren't mine. Guest apartments, family houses, hotels. I never bought anything believing I'd stay. He lowered his eyes to me. This one I bought. On me. On a life I never thought I deserved. I couldn't say anything for a while. He waited. He has no idea how long he waited in silence, his hand still on the granite behind me, chin down. His breathing counted. Do you want to see it? He asked. When? Sunday. I thought about the debt, the rent, the boss who'd been my boss since the day I started at De Luca Holdings. I thought about Vanessa's folder, about the 4th floor meeting, about the split eyebrow in his office last Friday. I thought about the man sitting on the floor of his own office saying interest on everything I've ever done. Sunday? I said. He nodded. He pressed his lips to my forehead, too quick to be a kiss, too slow to be only a goodbye. He left without turning around. I stayed in the small kitchen with my hand on the granite where his hand had been, still warm. Mari opened her bedroom door, barefoot, pajamas askew. "Are you going?" she asked. "I'm going. Bring the good coat," I laughed. And for the first time all week, it was a whole laugh. Sunday morning, a small bag in the trunk of the black car, I-94, Wisconsin on the horizon, low, blue-gray, still smeared with mist coming off the lake. Mateo drove without looking back, one hand on the wheel, the other near mine without touching it, and I understood, from his profile against the morning light, that he was afraid of arriving. And for the first time since I'd met him, I knew it wasn't the house he feared. He was afraid I wouldn't stay. Chapter 6. The House He Never Thought He Deserved. The Lake Geneva house came into view at the end of a narrow dirt road, ringed by trees still clinging to the last red of autumn. Pale wood, wide glass, a broad porch facing the water, smooth as a freshly polished mirror. Mateo cut the engine and stayed quiet a second longer than necessary, both hands still on the wheel, as if waiting on my reaction to know whether he was allowed to breathe. "You bought this," I said, not really asking. "I bought it thinking about a life I never believed I had the right to have," he answered, and the way he said it, low, almost apologizing for wanting it at all, made something in my chest clench and give way at the same time. I stepped out barefoot, because I'd kicked off my sneakers somewhere along the drive and never put them back on. The ground was still warm from the thin afternoon sun. Mateo came after me, the keys hooked over his index finger, watching the way he watched everything since the first time he crossed that conference room. Like a man measuring a distance he hadn't yet decided whether he wanted to walk. I pushed the front door open and went in laughing at all the wrong things, at the oversized windows, at the empty drawers, at the smell of new wood, at the good silence settling into the rooms without asking permission. I drifted through the kitchen, trailing my hand along the pale stone counter, opened the cabinet above the sink, and burst out laughing when I found precisely nothing inside. "You bought a house without a single glass," I said, turning to him. "I bought a house without anything because I wanted to choose what came into it with someone," he said, and he stayed in the doorway, hands in his coat pockets, as though crossing that threshold alone was still beyond him. I held my breath for a moment. The sentence had landed in me with a weight he probably hadn't calculated. I crossed the kitchen, took his hand, drew him inside, and shut the door. "You're in," I said. "Now you can't get back out." Mateo let out a small laugh, one of the ones only I know, one of the ones nobody at that company would believe his face was capable of. He squeezed my hand, lifted it to his mouth, and pressed his lips to my fingertips without a word. We walked the house together for the first time. He pointed to the spot where he wanted a turntable. I pointed to the corner where a ridiculous armchair I'd always wanted would fit. He pointed to the glass wall of the bedroom, facing the lake. I pointed to a chandelier he never would have chosen on his own. "You have no taste in anything," I teased. "I have taste in exactly one thing," he answered, low, not turning to me. "And she's standing barefoot in the middle of my hallway." The pier creaked softly under my feet. The sun was going down slow on the far side of the lake, laying orange trails across the surface. I sat at the end with my legs dangling. Mateo sat beside me, close enough that his shoulder leaned into mine without intending to. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was water knocking against the wood and one insistent bird from the opposite shore. "Yet I can't walk away from all of it at once," he said, not looking at me. "It'll take a year, maybe 2. There are people who depend on me, operations that have to be dismantled carefully so nobody dies in the process. I won't lie to you and say I wake up clean tomorrow." I studied his profile, the line of the jaw, the fine scar on the eyebrow that still showed an old mark, the exhaustion he wore like a second skin, which here, in this light, looked lighter. "I didn't ask for a saint," I answered. "I asked for the truth." He turned his face. Then, his eyes were clearer than I'd ever seen them. Maybe because the lake reflected, maybe because he'd let something fall that he'd been carrying in his chest for years. "I've lived through a lot, Chloe," he said, and the way he said my name was different. No corporate edge, no irony, no wall, but I've never lived peace. I don't know how it's done. Neither do I admitted. We'll learn together." He laughed again, low, and the laugh quieted into something gentler when his hand rose to my face, his thumb brushing my chin. The last of the sun struck the glass of the house behind us and came back reflected in the water. "May I?" he asked. I nearly cried out of fury and tenderness at once. The most dangerous man in Chicago, asking permission to kiss me at the end of a wooden pier in Wisconsin. "You always could," I answered. He kissed me slowly, like a man testing whether there's still a floor beneath his own feet. His hand cradled the back of my neck, steady, and I felt a difference from the other times he'd rested it there. It wasn't trembling. For the first time, it wasn't trembling. It was only certainty. When we drew apart, the light was nearly gone. He leaned his forehead to mine and stayed there, breathing too close. "Come," he said, finally, and helped me up. We walked back to the house hand in hand. A thin rain began before we even reached the door, more dew than storm. I switched on a lamp in the kitchen. He shed his coat. The living room still smelled of new wood and something I couldn't name. Maybe a beginning. He stopped at the head of the hallway that led to the bedroom. He looked at me in a way I already knew, except this time he didn't hold back half the question. He held out his hand. I took it. He drew me down the hallway in no hurry at all. The fine rain pattered against the skylight. The bedroom door eased shut behind us, soft, as though the whole house had agreed to honor that quiet. I woke to sun on my face and the smell of coffee. I got up without a sound, straightened his shirt I'd slept in, and went down barefoot over the new wood stairs. Mateo was in the kitchen, his back to me, dark pajama pants, broad shoulders against the morning light coming through the glass wall. He'd put music on low from somewhere. Jazz, of course, the kind of records he collects like small religions. "Good morning," I said, leaning in the doorway. He turned. He looked at me like I was something he was still teaching himself to believe in. He slid a mug toward me without asking how I take it, because he already knew, and the fact that he already knew undid me in a way no word could have. "Good morning," he answered, his voice rough with sleep. I sat on the counter. He stood across from me with his own mug, watching. Beneath the marble, his bare foot found mine and stayed there, leaning against it, like reserving a place for the rest of my life. "We need to buy a glass," I said, fighting back a smile. "We need to buy everything," he answered. "I don't even know where the sugar is." I got up to look. I opened the wrong cabinet. I opened the second wrong cabinet. He watched from across the counter, biting the corner of his mouth to keep from laughing. And when I finally surrendered and turned around, he tipped his chin toward the third cabinet. "You're terrible at finding things," he said. "And you're terrible at helping," I shot back. "I'm excellent at helping," he said, setting his mug aside and crossing the kitchen. "Just not when you make that face." He pinned me between his body and the counter. No force in it, only presence. He pressed his forehead to mine. The fine rain from the night had stopped at some point neither of us had noticed. "And what if I want forever?" I asked, quietly, because inside that kitchen it still felt possible to say absurd things out loud. He smiled, the same small, rare, lethal smile he'd let slip the first time in the conference room, the day I should have been fired. "Then it's forever," he answered. "I don't know how to do halfway with you." The rest of the day passed slow in a way I'd forgotten existed. He fried eggs. I burned the toast. We ate sitting on the living room floor because we still had no table. He showed me the stretch of wall where he wanted a shelf for the records. I sketched on a napkin where my ridiculous armchair would go. He laughed at the armchair. I laughed at his taste. Afternoon slid into evening almost without warning. We ate leftovers. He started up the temporary turntable he'd carried in the trunk. I danced barefoot in the empty living room. At some point he caught me by the waist, and we just stood there, swaying without rhythm, like the music was only an excuse. "You sing terribly," he murmured, too close to my ear. "I know," I answered. "Don't stop," he asked. I didn't stop. I woke in the middle of the night to his side of the bed empty. I wasn't afraid. It was a new kind of not afraid, still under construction. I sat on the edge of the mattress, straightened his shirt that was still on me, and went down to the kitchen barefoot, feeling the cold of the floor. I found Mateo standing, propped against the counter, holding an empty mug, looking out at the glass wall. The house was dark, only a small light on over the sink. He didn't hear me come in, or he heard and pretended not to, so I could watch him like that a second longer. The man who silenced rooms. The man no one dared to face on the most dangerous floor in Chicago. The man who had walked into a warehouse and come out with a trembling hand. There he was, standing in the dark kitchen of the lake house, gazing into the night as though he still didn't believe he had permission to be inside it. I crossed the cold floor barefoot. I leaned my body against his back and slid my arm around his waist, my cheek between his shoulders. He breathed out slowly, like he'd been waiting his whole life for it. "Do you ever sleep?" I whispered. "I'm learning," he answered. We stayed there a while, not speaking again. His hand found mine at his waist and settled over it, his heartbeat steady against my cheek, calm. For the first time, calm. I looked out the window while he breathed. The lake was smooth, the garden dark, the trees still, and for a second it seemed there was something at the end of the curve, past the last tree. I blinked, and there was nothing. I smiled to myself, leaning into him. The silence of the lake was so good you could invent things inside it. I tightened the embrace. He turned his face, kissed my forehead, caught my waist with his free hand, and drew me around to stand in front of him. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, quietly. I looked at him. The small light from the sink drew half his face. The other half stayed in the dark, the way it always had, but the half I could see was at peace. "I'm thinking Monday shouldn't be as bad as I always thought it was," I answered. He smiled. "Small, rare, lethal. Tomorrow is Monday," he reminded me. "I know," I said. "For the first time, I'm not afraid of it." He pulled me in by the waist, set his forehead against mine, and stayed there, breathing in time with me. The record he'd put on before bed was still turning in silence on the far side of the room. No needle, no sound, just spinning like it, too, was in no rush to end. And it was like that, the cold floor under my feet, his hand steady on my back, that I understood peace doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives like this, barefoot, in the kitchen, at 3 a.m, in the shape of a man who learned how to stay. Outside, the lake stayed smooth. Lena here. That wraps up Book 1, and I've already finished Book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. Inside me, it had been 6 months of peace with Matteo De Luca. 6 months in which I was finally able to breathe without looking over my shoulder. 6 months thinking we had survived the chaos. That the dangerous man who slept beside me every night had chosen to protect me, not destroy me. Until the anonymous package arrived. Old photos, hidden reports, and a recording with his voice, cold, calculated, giving the order that ended my brother Ethan's life. Every kiss he gave me turned to poison. Every "you're mine" sounded like a sentence I hadn't understood at the time. Every night I gave myself completely. He knew exactly what he was hiding. When I faced Matteo with the package open between us, he didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just looked at me in silence. The same silence that now echoes inside me like a door closing forever. And what if everything we lived wasn't love, but the cruelest revenge he could have planned? Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to Books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a Book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.